sales documents, specifically around sales document entry, the different types of sales documents that we have, which we've looked at during our setup. So we've talked about estimates or quotes, we've talked about sales orders, invoices, sales receipts, again, all those document types that we support within the system. So on my left-hand side, I have my sales search, and then I also have my drop-down. And the drop-down reflects that workflow in the system, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So I can see when I click on sales, it runs my sales document search, and this gives me a very high-level document header level view of all of the documents within my system. And so I have some checkboxes here at the top. I can hide voided sales transactions or sales documents. I can hide posted sales documents. And again, posting, which we'll talk about here shortly, is the posting is that step that designates I am done with a document in SalesPad Cloud. I'm ready to see the financial impact on QuickBooks. So that's what triggers sending that sales transaction over to QuickBooks Online. Now, for sales documents, there's a couple different states or statuses on sales documents. So one of the big ones is posted. And so again, we can hide those posted sales documents. That'll move anything that has this checkbox as posted. It'll take that out of our view. We just won't see them. If I go back to it unchecked, then I see here's my posted documents. And again, those show up in green, designating that they have been posted. So this is a return that we had posted previously. So we have the posted flag. We also have the void flag. So in SalesPad Cloud, there is no deleting of documents. So once you go into the new transaction screen, so if I start a new quote, this quote automatically exists in the system as soon as it is created. It has a sales document number at the top. That means that document is in the system. I cannot delete that document. That number has now been used. The only way that I can make this as no longer an active document is I can either void the document or I can transfer that document. In this case, it is a quote, so I can then transfer that quote to an order or transfer it to an invoice, or I can void it. And so void is just another status on this transaction. It will show up in our sales document search unless I have the hide voided sales documents. So again, here's the quote, has a line drawn through it, and it's in light gray, which again designates that this has been a voided document. The line drawn through it is the biggest indication that it has been voided. We also have a column that we can add for void, which would be the same type of checkbox like we have on posting. And so we would see that checkbox that marks it as void. So we have posting, we have void, then we also have historical. And historical is also designated as being gray. And there's a couple of different ways that documents can get moved to history. Anytime you transfer a document, so if I transfer a quote to an order, that quote is going to go to history. It's not going to be voided, it's not going to have the line drawn through it. It's just going to show as in history. It's a snapshot of that quote at the time of transfer, and I can no longer make changes to that quote at that point once it moves to history. Orders move to history in a couple of different ways as well. Orders move to history through transferring the order to an invoice, through splitting the order, or through partially invoicing the order. And again, you'll see some of these. So this document number 98, this one actually was a split. And so I can also see that we have a split or partial invoicing status. And so this one actually tells me on the parent document. So this was the original document. Notice it has no dots at the end of the document number. So this was a split document. And then it ended up in the .1 and the .2. And we'll talk through splitting functionality here very shortly as well, because it does pertain to sales transactions. So I have split the document, which moves my original order to invoice and then creates my new .1 and .2 that I can then manage through my workflow. So the third and the final way that we move or see documents go to history is the partial invoicing. And so with partial invoicing, it's going to be very similar. So we see here is 97. 97 was partially invoiced. And so there is a 97.1 that got created. Well, 97.1 also got invoiced, and I know that because there's a 97.2. And so that means that it has been partially invoiced a second time. And so you're not going to see the 97.1 in history. You're only going to see the parent, the 97, and then you're going to see the 97.2. It's listed as unchanged, which means it's still ready to be invoiced at some point. So we can also drill into the historical document. And again, historical documents, you're available to view them, you're available to email them, you can print them. Again, it's just a snapshot of what that document looked like at the time that you executed something on that document. In this case, I partially invoiced it. We can also see at the top it's flagged as historical. It's marked as partially invoiced. But again, I could still print this document. I could email the document. I just can't add additional lines to it. I can't void the document. I can't do any other thing, any other of these pieces of functionality on this document once it goes to a void, or once it goes to historical, excuse me. Now, that holds true for everything except payments, and that applies on historical invoices. And so, jump out of this real quick. If we go to a historical invoice, now an invoice goes to history in one way only. And so, posting invoices moves that invoice, or posting returns, move those documents to history. They won't get grayed out. They won't be that lighter color. They'll just be marked as posted. And so they're in history, but they're flagged as posted, which again means that they're ready to be or have gone over to QuickBooks Online. And so we see that it is flagged as historical, and it's also flagged as posted. Now on this historical invoice, we can add payments. And so this is going to be a one-off payment specific to this historical document, which allows me then to make this document paid in full if needed. So it's similar to applying a payment on the QuickBooks Online side to a single historical invoice, or to a single invoice on the QuickBooks Online side. So we'll pick that up here. If I were to go to QuickBooks Online, make a payment within QuickBooks Online, and then come back to this invoice, after the integration is ran, I would see that this invoice has been paid, and it will be marked as paid in full, or whatever amount was paid through QuickBooks Online. So that's the only edits that you can make on a historical document, and in this case it has to be a historical invoice. So back to my sales search screen. Again, there's a couple different ways to start a sales transaction from scratch. So the easiest way, or one of the ways, is to go to the sales document search, go to the new transaction, and from here I can create any sales transaction that I have created in the system that is marked as shown and that is not flagged as inactive. And so in this case, I have a number of different documents that I can create here from the sales document, or from the sales search. So if I create an order from here, there will be the biggest thing that you'll notice is that there is no customer specified on this screen. And so I have no customer listed. I'd have to go select a customer. So that does, when starting sales transactions from the sales search, it does add additional button clicks for the user. So the way that I like to create documents, and I'm going to void this out. So the other way, and the way that I prefer to create sales transactions, is to go through a customer card. And so I'm going to pick out my Cool Cards customer. From this customer card, I have the ability to start any of those same transactions that I have listed as well. So in this case, I'm going to start a new order. And now the nice thing about doing it this way is when I start this new order, I am going to see that the Cool Cards customer is specified by default on this order. So again, it saves me a couple of those clicks. It'll also load any of those defaults that I may have set off of that customer, like default salesperson or payment terms or shipping method. So any of those things that we have spent our time previously setting as defaults on the customer will now get defaulted onto those sales transactions. So I like doing it this way. A lot of times we'll see it done this way when it's a customer service rep or a salesperson that is entering the sales transaction in the cloud. Typically we want them on that customer card. We want them being able to see that customer's information. So if I go back to my Cool Cards customer, I can see all of the specific information about this customer. I can keep my interactions, and again, this is where we want those users that are interacting with these customers keying in notes. So I may add a new interaction. So I've added my note. I can specify my interaction type if I have those set up in the system. I can assign it to somebody if I have that set up in the system. I can mark that it needs to be completed on a specific date. In this case, I just want the time and date stamped note. And so I can see that this was created. I can go add additional columns. I can see that the date that it was created on and who it was created by in the system. And so then it flags that it was created on today, and you can see my username there that I created the note. So I want my salespeople or whoever is interacting with those customers, I want them in the system putting in these interactions. And so it makes the most sense then that if I have a new sales transaction for this specific customer, that I originate those from the customer card. Again, it's just easier. It sets all those defaults, and then it pulls that customer by default. So again, you remember I mentioned that documents, as soon as you start them, are saved in the system. So I have this order 100 because I did not void it out. It's in the system. It's assigned to that user or to that customer. And so now I can start setting my header level information, or I can start adding sales lines. And so in this case, I have no price level defined for this customer. I have my default warehouse. I have no shipping method set. I have no payment term set. And those things aren't necessary. You don't have to specify those for you to be able to create sales transactions. This customer, though, I'm going to go ahead and set them to 2% net 10 or 2% 10 net 30. Just because I want to use that payment term, I may go ahead and set a shipping method. And again, these are things that I may specify or may require me to talk with the customer and figure out what they want, what makes most sense for them, or have those defaults come off the customer card. I can put in a customer PO number if they have a number that they're providing me to put in. Reference number is just another reportable field that we have in the system. If I use tax codes, or if I'm selling taxable products, then we can specify our tax code. And again, that's set up on the QuickBooks Online side. I also have a salesperson that I can specify if I am tracking sales by sales rep in the system. In this case, I don't have any set up in the system, so I'm not going to pick anything. Requested ship date, when the customer would like for it to be shipped to them. And again, it's just a reportable field. Maybe I have my warehouse group set up so that they can sort documents off of a requested ship date, and they know they have to pick and pack everything that's 2 days prior to that requested ship date. So again, it just gives me an additional functionality and additional reporting ability for how I want to manage my process. And then ship date can be set automatically, so I wouldn't set it manually. So the system can set ship date based off of you shipping the document through ShipStation, or flagging the document has been shipped and adding tracking numbers. And so now I'm ready to start adding my line items onto my document. So I can click New Line. I can go ahead and start entering whatever this customer is ordering. And so I'm going to pick a couple of different items. So I'll pick an item, I'll specify a quantity. And again, it should pull in my unit price. I'm going to reset my columns back to the default layout just because there's so many on there. That way it'll kind of give you a better picture of what we're looking at. So I have my quantity that I've entered, my unit of measure, I have the location, and again, the location is defaulting off of the header. I can specify unit price, and again, I can move these columns around. I can add them, I can take them off. Maybe I don't care about drop ships and I'm not doing line discounts. So I can take those off the grid, may not care about backorder quantity. So again, I can take all of these items off the grid so I'm not seeing them. It makes it easier for me to use. Maybe I don't care about SKU. So I can take all of these off, and it just cleans up my grid. I can also move these around. So for me, maybe it makes sense that I do item number and quantity and unit price. Those are the 3 columns that I touch the most. And so I just move those around, and now I put those. So I start with my item number, I specify my quantity, I set my unit price. Didn't get that one moved over. And so those are the only 3 columns I'm really touching. And so again, just speeding up my order entry, or the ability to enter those items onto the sales line, making my order entry faster. I also have the description, so this will default in off of the item master. And then I have a line comment, so I can type any additional comments here that I need to, specific for this line. And again, on the printed form, I can control whether those line comments print or not. I have my unit price. Again, I removed my discount, so we have the ability to set a discount percent on the line as well, which is going to update my extended price. So it's going to be the quantity times the unit price less my discount amount. And so I'll be able to see that reflected on that line on a line-by-line basis. And so now I'm ready to move on to my next line, and I can start adding in another item. And again, my drop-down is being filtered by whatever I have or whatever items are available in the system. And again, I can set quantity here of whatever I'm selling. My unit prices are defaulting in based off of what I have in the system. In this case, it's my list price that I have specified on the item master, since I have no price level set. So I could manually update this price. Maybe they get an $8 price. And so I can update that price and it's going to change on that line for me. Now I also have this little letter I, this info button that's on the right hand side. So if at any point now or later I need to go look at that line item information, I can click on the I, and this is just going to give me hint information or item information about this specific line item. So I see my item number at the top. If I had an item description, it would show right below. I can see that this line has already been fulfilled because I have the system set up to auto allocate, auto fulfill. I also can see the margin on this specific line. So I see that I'm making a 33% margin on this line. And then I can see quantities across the location. So this is quantity specific for this item. And so I have 231 on hand. So some of that same information is available in the item lookup. But again, I don't want to have to drill back into the item lookup just to see information about this line item that I've already added in my document. And so it just makes it easier here. It's also very nice if we do things like I have to back order this line. And so I'm going to add a back ordered item onto the document. So if I pick this Padron 2000 and I want 5 of those, so I see my red exclamation point on the left hand side. That lets me know that it is back ordered. It also, if I hover my mouse over it, it tells me how many are back ordered. If I now go into my unit or my info option for that item, you'll notice the header is red, signifying that it is back ordered or that something is different about this item. It's not fulfilled. I can also see that I have quantities, so I have no quantity on hand, I have none available, I have a total of 11 back ordered, and then I already have a PO out on the system for a quantity of 3. And so if this quantity was available to be covered by that PO, then I could go link this line item to a PO as opposed to me doing a one-off purchase. I also see that this vendor has no primary vendor set, which means I have no lead time information available. So if I have the primary vendor, it would show here. If I have a lead time specified on the vendor items, it would also show here for me as well. So again, giving the user as much information as possible about this item while they're in the system doing item entry. Again, no need to go run reports, no need to flip to some other screen. So I can do a couple of different things with this back order. So this is an order that I have in the system. I could push this out into the workflow. I could manage this document as a complete document. I could go from here and generate a PO for that line item. The one thing I do want to show you is the ability to split documents. And again, this is functionality that is not available in other systems or in other competitive systems that, again, we feel really sets us apart, giving us flexibility in how we manage our documents. So I have this sales order. I want to go ahead and I want to split this order. Now, again, we could do this through the workflow. Split is an action that we can do in the workflow. In this scenario, though, I'm just going to manually split the document. And so I go to the actions drop down at the top of the header. I select split, and I go to my split document screen. So splitting it gives me the ability to take a single order and split that order into one or more orders. And again, splitting always creates or generates multiple documents, 2 or more documents of the same document type, the same original document type that I'm splitting off of. So in this case, I'm splitting an order, which is going to allow me to create 1 or 2 or more orders off of this original. I have my split options on the left. This is telling the system what to split the document by. In this case, I'm going to split by back order quantity. And so when I check the box, you remember I had the Padron 2000 as being a back order line. This is going to split into 2 different documents. I have the first 2 line items that are available to be fulfilled and that are fulfilled already on the on my top document, and then my bottom document will be my back order line. Again, the idea here is that I have workflow set up that my customer will accept multiple shipments of the product or multiple shipments off of the same order. And so I can now split this into 2 different orders. I can take the top order with a fulfilled line, send that out to the warehouse to be picked, packed, and shipped. The second part of the order, the back order quantity, can go to my needs purchase or back order queue where my staff can then pick that document up, either tie it to an existing PO, generate a new PO, but manage the handling of that back order line item. So temporarily, this will say split 0, split 1. So I have this one split. If I uncheck the back order quantity, it would then compress those back. I also have other criteria that I could split on, which may potentially generate multiple or additional documents. I can split by location on the sales line. In this case, my location is the same across all sales line. I could split by dropship quantity. So I could split by, and I can check any of these boxes are in conjunction with each other. So I could split by dropship and I could split by backorder quantity. So if I had two, lines that had backorder quantity and then different lines that had dropships, that would create 3 documents for me. So my documents that were, or my lines that were fulfilled, my lines that were backordered, and my lines that were dropshipped. And then I could also split by fulfilled quantity. And again, this typically is something that we do when you're using a separate fulfillment method or you're set to manually fulfill documents. A lot of times what we'll see is the entire document will go to the warehouse. The warehouse will pick what they can, and then those lines will get fulfilled. And then you split the document either out of the workflow or manually to what lines are not fulfilled would then stay in the warehouse queue. What lines were fulfilled would then go out and be ready to invoice. Once I have decided that this looks like I want it to look and split the way that I want it to split, I can then click the split document button. That's going to execute my split, tell me that my split is completed, and update my lines to show my order numbers of what were split. And so we're going to use the base order or the base document number. So in this case, my original document was document number 100, and it's going to create a 100.1 and a 100.2. Dot 1 is always going to be the lines that can be fulfilled first. So it's the lines that ideally would be going to your customer first. Dot 2, dot 3, anything after that, those are going to be the lines that typically need more processing or more functionality or something else done to them. They're back ordered, so I need to purchase those. They're drop shipped, so I need to purchase those. They're not fulfilled, so I need to do something with those or fulfill those at a later date. So I have a couple of options. I can either click on one of those documents and take me into the document. I can return to the customer, or I can just click done, and that's going to take me back to the parent document. You'll see that that document is now historical, and it's flagged as a split document. And so again, this is my snapshot of the document at the time that I split it. And then if I go to the links tab is going to show me all related documents to this order. So I will see the dot 1 and the dot 2, and then from there I can drill into those. Now, in this case, the dot 1 and dot 2, because I did the splitting as a manual process, they're going to be in the same workflow batch as the parent document was. So they're both going to still be sitting in the sales document batch. If I had executed the split through workflow, then my workflow would take care of moving those documents to whatever the next step was. And so in this case, I could have the workflow split the document for me. The dot 1 would have gone to the warehouse batch. The dot 2 could have gone to some other batch. Typically, I would have a batch set up to be needs purchase or back ordered. Something that would make sense for holding that or some batch name that would make sense for holding that document, signifying that it needed more processing. So that's the splitting portion or splitting functionality of SalesPad Cloud. And again, so it can create multiple documents. It doesn't necessarily or won't necessarily only create a dot 1 and dot 2. You may split by 3 of those criteria, and you may end up with 4 or 5 different split documents out of that. So again, there's multiple different ways that you can split those documents, which could result in multiple different end documents or dot documents that you create. I could also split this document a second time, and again, these are now 2 separate documents. So I could add additional lines to them. I could go back and figure out that, you know what, my system is wrong. I don't have any of the Arturo Fuentes in stock, so my inventory is wrong. So I need to go back order those. I can manually back order, and I could split this again, and then it would split the dot 1 and dot 3. So again, I can still, it just allows me to manage these documents completely independent of each other now. The one thing to note is once I have split documents, they can't be combined again at a later date. So they are now 2 separate orders in the system, and we manage as 2 separate orders in the system, or however many orders I've created, those will all be managed as separate orders in the system going forward. So they'll end up in being invoiced separately, they'll have separate invoice numbers, and they'll get posted over to QBO separately. So at any point we can go to this links tab, and we'll be able to see that or be able to get to and see the history of those documents, however many times they've been split, the invoices that have been created off of them. And I'll give you an example. So if I take this dot 1 and I go ahead and I transfer the dot 1 over to an invoice. So I'm going to generate my invoice. So I've now sent my dot 1 document over to an invoice. We'll have a new invoice number that shows up for that transaction, so invoice number 52. Now if I go to the links tab, I still see my orders that are in the system. And if we go to any of those orders in the system, we'll be able to see that there is an invoice out there as well. So if I go to my links tab, I'll see that I have an invoice, I'll see the order, and I'll see my split document. You also know that the .2 doesn't show up in the system. We're not going to show you the document that you're currently on in this view. So I'm on the .2, it doesn't show in the system. If I go to the original document, I'll be able to see that there is the .2 still showing in the links tab. So I have the invoice, I have the .2, and then this was the document that I originally transferred to invoice. So that's splitting. So the other functionality that we have off of a sales order is we have the ability to partially invoice. Partial invoice and splitting are very similar in that I have the ability to take an order and send some portion of that order to an invoice. So I may have some lines that are fulfilled that I can actually invoice a customer for. And so instead of splitting that document into 2 orders and managing it that way, I can actually take that document, I can generate a remaining order and an invoice for whatever I have left over or for whatever I've already sent to the customer. So I'm going to go back to my customer search, and I am going to use my Cool Cars customer again because I like starting my sales transactions from that customer card. I am going to create a new order. And I'm going to add a couple of sales lines to this order. So I'm going to pick 2 items. One item I'm going to have in stock. And I'm going to do 3 of those. And then I'm going to pick an item that is back ordered. Now I don't have to use back ordered items. It makes it easy because it does it by default. But in this case, I've got 3 of the top line, 1 of the second line. I have my little back ordered item. And so now, again, I can move this through my workflow. In this case, I'm just going to manually transfer. So I can only invoice quantity that's been fulfilled. And that's why only the single line item shows up. The other line item has no quantity fulfilled, so it's back ordered. And so it doesn't show in this grid. So I can then go ahead and invoice the customer for all 3 of these, or maybe I've only sent them 1. And so in that case, I can change this quantity, and I'm only going to invoice them for 1 of those items, even though I had 3 fulfilled. So I'm going to go ahead and generate my invoice. So again, the biggest difference with partial invoicing is that I end up with an invoice and an order, not 2 of the same document that I was splitting off of, or 2 of the same document type. And so this is my invoice for a quantity of 1. If I go to my links tab, it's still going to show my information here. So I see my 101, which got moved to history because that was my original. And now I see the 101.1, which is the remaining quantity. And so if we drill into that, we'll see I still have 2 line items on the order. My top line item that I had quantity fulfilled of 3 now shows a quantity of 2. This line still shows a quantity of 1. Now I can partially invoice off this as many times as I need to. So I'm going to go ahead and invoice this again. So again, only the line that's fulfilled can be invoiced. So I'm going to go ahead and invoice the full 2 of those, or the full quantity of those. Drive that line item over to an invoice. And now if I look in my links tab, I'm going to see a new order that got created for the remaining quantity. And I'm going to see that the original line item is on there, the Padron item is on there with a quantity of 0 because I fully invoiced it. And then the only thing that's left is this line that's back ordered. So again, partially invoicing is just, it allows me to generate 1 or more invoices over time off of the original order, creating copies of that order with the quantity remaining on that sales line or on that document. Again, very similar to what if you're an enterprise user or a QuickBooks desktop user, what you're familiar with seeing there, because that same type of functionality is available there. So that's partial invoice. So again, you can do splitting, or you can do partial invoicing, or you can do both. Typically, we don't see customers that are splitting do partial invoicing. They're usually going to do one or the other. Either they're going to make the decision to split orders and manage those as separate orders, or they're going to partially invoice throughout the process, driving that the lines that they have fulfilled over to an invoice and managing the remaining quantity there as a separate. And again, we can reroute that remaining order back through the workflow and have it go through whatever our workflow process is. And again, we'll go in more detail about workflow very shortly. So that is managing or sales order management or sales document management and how we handle sales transactions within the system. And again, we can do that same process with quotes. We can split quotes. You know, again, we have that ability to manage that split. You can split invoices, you can split returns. Again, any of that same functionality. Now, partial invoicing is only available for orders in which you can drive an order to an invoice. So that's really the strong point of SalesPad Cloud, is the way that we manage those orders, the functionality that we provide those users for managing those orders. And then on top of that, we add in the workflow component, which we'll jump over to shortly and walk through that, how we set that up and where that really adds in an additional value for us.